So yeah, just as a quick introduction, I think there's only, I guess 3 or 4 people in the room who actually know who I am. I'm the Maths Outreach Officer at the University of Kent. I know who quite a few of you are, because I've read your names in the programme and I've wanted to have contact, so here we are. I've been the Outreach Officer since January 2014, and I've been a PhD student who's been involved in outreach for quite a bit longer than that, specifically with the Royal Institution, which you're going to hear a little bit about later, and also the Further Maths Support Programme. Now, I know there are 2 representatives in the room for the Further Maths Support Programme who probably don't know who I am. Hi. We meet for the first time. Yes, I've worked with your colleagues. Okay. So anyway, my role at the university is quite specific, and it's to explore some of the ways which outreach with the public, specifically secondary school students, can be rigorised, as it were. Just to explain something to do with this picture, does anyone know what that green thing in the bottom is? The world's longest pool table. It is a luminescent soliton tank. So has anyone come across solitons before? Yeah, okay, so a few people, excellent. Basically, this is a demonstration based on some of the research done at the University of Kent in solitons. And I chose this picture. It's my favourite picture because initially, when I was looking to have an opening slide, I wanted a picture where everyone on it looks really engaged. And they are, apart from...
She's thinking.
Yeah. She's thinking deeply. I wasn't actually sure she was conscious. But anyway, so this was, around here are PhD students and lecturers, and they're demonstrating some of the ideas. Anyway, you can't get everyone, right? So, when I first took office, as it were, and when I was a PhD student, way back when, the idea of outreach was to have fun, right? Okay, so to show students, and sometimes their parents, that this is a fun thing to do, that this is worthy, that people make a living out of doing this kind of thing. And it was great, right? So, I'm going to show you lots of pictures of my team because, for one, they're more photogenic than I am. And there's students. Okay, so these are students from the University of Kent, typically undergraduates. This here was one of the first things we did in Maths Outreach. Can anyone guess which maths thing this relates to? It's 2 words and it's GR. Golden ratio. Yeah, okay. So this is popular, right? So there are lots and lots of outreach things that you can do with students. It's quite a straightforward idea. It's fairly accessible. And here we mirrored the Vitruvian Man. So if you've seen this picture, the perfect man that was painted by Da Vinci, and all his proportions, and I'll leave it open to the imagination exactly what that means, all of his proportions were in the golden ratio. And this was said to be physically the perfect human. So we thought we would test this, right? We kept our clothes on. We took pictures of us standing in these positions. And before we went out into Canterbury High Street, we measured who was physically the most perfect according to the golden ratio. It wasn't me. No, unfortunately it wasn't me. It was Rachel. Okay, so Rachel, when measured and compared against all of the golden ratio stuff, was thought to be the most perfect. And here she's smiling because she fancied that guy who just picked her as being the most perfect. Okay, I was told that afterwards. So this was one of the things we did. Obviously not that serious, just a way of getting people talking about the golden ratio. This picture here is actually a Royal Institution masterclass, which you're going to hear something about. This is Andy Paul, an ambassador who is annoyingly confident and charming and intelligent, giving a session on the mathematics of juggling. And he was, you're right, Colin, and he, along with myself to some degree, did a little bit about the mathematics of juggling. And it's a great session. There's many colourful physical aspects to it, goes down really well. And someone who you may or may not know kind of did the whole mathematics side to it. So we can talk about that as well. There's a question here, actually. And I suppose it would be worth having a minute or so to discuss it. And assuming we mean by a hole, a pretty large hole, so not something which is a thread hole, how many holes are there in a t-shirt? Should we have 10, 15 seconds for people to talk about that? Yeah, okay, and then we'll do a vote. So chat about it quickly. How many holes are in a t-shirt? Okay. Okay. So we obviously had. What a good discussion this turns out to be. This always gets people talking. And the first question is, what's the definition of a hole? Exactly. Now, ignoring that, because it's not like you're mathematicians or anything, what do we think was the answer? Firstly, who said 4? Yep. Did anyone say anything different? Who said higher than that? Who said lower? And what was the guess for lower?
3 or 2.
Or 1, yeah, it's okay. The answer is 3. Okay, if you use the definition that you can loop something around it. And you can demonstrate this excellently with Play-Doh. Okay, because Play-Doh is the perfect substance with which to model basic topology, because you can pinch, squish, and do all this stuff with it. Here's an Ambassador John, less perfect than myself when measured. And he hears about that a lot. He's demonstrating this to some students. Okay. And finally, this is not from any talk I've ever given. No one ever looks that happy. This was the other strand to the kind of outreach that universities were doing. Okay, you know, you would go out into a big festival, you would talk to lots of people, and it's very wholesome, it's very enjoyable. So this was when things were easy. Actually, I got this from Google. I'm not nicking it from someone's talk, am I? Excellent, good. So, for universities, actually, I have to admit, when I was preparing this talk, I assumed everyone in the audience would be working or studying at a UK university. That was wrong, wasn't it? Yeah, that was my plan A. You're about to meet plan B, which consists of me freestyling the rest of the talk. Anyway, this applies. So for UK universities, doing outreach was something you did to say you were doing it. And again, it was very nice, but there wasn't a large take-up. And what has happened since then? So those who work at a UK university, whose dreams have been haunted by this idea? Yeah, most definitely me. The Teaching Excellence Framework is Ofsted for universities. We may as well think about it in those terms. It's a way of regulating the teaching, a way of determining which universities are teaching better, whatever particularly that means, and then indexing them accordingly. Now, things such as your funding, you know, the amount that you can charge a student will be dependent on your scores in the TEF. Okay, so you've got to be good at it, basically. Widening participation, has anyone come across that term when doing outreach? Very much so, yeah. Yeah, exactly. This has now been, to some degree, quantified. Widening participation means meeting people, students of a secondary school age, who may not typically be considered as budding mathematicians. So this is one thing that changed. And anyone read this? Don't? And follow up with this? Maybe? So this series of government papers which say we have to do widening participation, which is obviously a good thing. Everyone TEF ready? No, because I don't really know what the TEF is, so I mean, how do you be ready for it? So this is one of the things that is changing in the UK, at least, with outreach. Okay, so how do you show that you are actually getting people into STEM subjects in particular? Okay, here's another one. So who actually in the room does research? Who is a researcher, as in? Yep, okay. Here's another friend of yours. If you want to know whether you're an average researcher, a very good researcher, or below average, the ref will tell you that. Okay? So this is a very crude instrument, well, by institution. Yes. This is an instrument which is not favoured by academics. They don't particularly like this. And it puts a lot of pressure. I don't know about the other people who are doing this, but it puts an awful lot of pressure on universities. And what you have to do is show that your research has impact. And impact means that you are actually changing something in the real world. Now, for mathematicians, that can be a difficult thing to do because these things start off as a bit abstract, right? So it can be actually hard. And one way which you do it is you have outreach projects which distribute your research. Okay, numbers. This is a big thing. So there's one of the members of staff at the University of Kent is beginning to pull their hair out because we're having to do all sorts of preparation exercises for this. The final thing is universities who are putting money into outreach want to know that they're getting some money back. Okay? Ultimately, I don't know about the various universities who are being represented here, but there's normally tens of thousands of pounds which go into this. So the question of kind of how do you justify that money, is it profitable? Can I keep my job, for example? Okay, so I just Googled A-level results day, and here we are. Our goal now, apparently as educators, is to turn these people into money for us. There we are. All right then. So it would be a bit conceited to get up and to say that we have the answer for all of these, specifically as the REF in terms of impact and the TEF are still very much in their infancy. So in terms of recruitment, what kind of options are available for us? Now this actually, when I applied for my job as the outreach officer, I said fun was the main thing that I wanted to go with, okay, and that wasn't met with a unanimously positive reception. However, this very much is the backbone, right? You guys know more about that than me. You all are into doing fun maths things. This is kind of an advertising trick, really. If you want something to buy some product, if you want someone to buy a product, then they have to be using it regularly and you have to familiarise them with it. Now, this is something which was kind of painful for me to come across. Young people are better at talking to other young people than I am. So there we are. That doesn't feel good, especially when their feedback scores start beating your own. And you feel you've slightly lost the definition of what cool is. But there we are. So this is the ambassador, some of the ambassador team that we have. So we saw Rachel earlier. She's unfortunately left now. One thing I find, and I was having a bit of a chat over the break, is that I'm kind of running out of ideas, or at least I feel I'm slowing down a bit. Young people have got loads of them. You know, they've got so many ideas for maths. There's so many people who like these. They are the perfect representative. Okay, a couple more things. So for the people who do maths outreach, do you have contact with teachers? So are these the primary contacts that you use in order to get into the classrooms? Because they are, for me, mostly. The Further Maths Support Programme is very good, as are the Royal Institution. This helps, certainly, so having resources for teachers. So, for example, we get our students, the ambassadors who we just saw, to produce A-level resources by our students for your students. We distribute them free. Teachers are very fond of it. And so there's a question at the very end of the previous talk, which was, how can this essentially be measured? How can we determine what the impact is? It is measurable, albeit in a kind of primordial stage. You can actually show, and we have shown, that by supporting students, specifically in the curriculum sense, but also with extra sessions, you can improve their grades, and you can improve them quite substantially. Okay, this is where we veer into slight conjecture. Here we go. Oh yeah, okay. Who's heard of the heat database? Yep. Has anyone read George Orwell's novel 1984? Yeah. You know Big Brother? That should be slightly less scary to you than the heat database. The heat database is the Higher Education Attainment Tracker, actually stands for something, and it will record all of the activities in outreach undertaken by any student who gives their permission for that to be recorded. And it will tell us, hopefully on the national level, essentially how effective is outreach. Okay? And universities at the moment, there's a rollout, so it's beginning at Kent, and I think it's in other institutions as well, which will give us data in order to understand, is what we're doing effective? Okay, and over lunchtime conversation, there was the question of data protection. The government has an interesting policy on that. Namely, students will give them lots of data and they don't feel particularly inclined to protect it. So this data will be available to lots of institutions, academic institutions. So the TEF is, I think it was one of the things that was drawn up by Boris Johnson's brother. Yeah, it was. Our Vice-Chancellor said that Boris Johnson and his brother are actually different. His brother is intelligent. She's met him. But anywho, these are a couple of the themes which are mentioned in there. So widening participation, again, this tends to be on the lips of many people who are involved in the rollout of outreach. And of course, these things become very important now. So many universities, I guess, will be involved in the Athena Swan to some degree, yep, which is representing women, I think, in STEM subjects, or is it every subject? Every? Excellent, okay. So I obviously don't understand this as well as you. EDI as well is becoming quite big, and ultimately you need to be able to show that you are providing this equality of opportunity. So all these things become documented. The classes which we have at the University of Kent typically are attended more so by female students. We're still struggling to get BME students just because of the area we're in. And the lecturers and the ambassadors as well, predominantly female. And there's research which shows, for example, that if you put a female session leader in front of a female group of students, that will have apparently some measurable effect on their desire to do mathematics or the subject which they're teaching. However, if you put a male session leader in front of them, that can actually, in some cases, prevent them from wishing to do it. So it is actually more sensitive than I'd anticipated. Okay, so the final thing. The ref is a really tricky one because they keep a lot of their methods secret, as in, how do you show that, yeah, we've reached out to all these people, we've changed their minds about maths, they definitely want to do something with this now. Obviously, that's quite hard. But I know someone who knows someone, apparently, who's on the panel. And in terms of achieving impact, it's not just kind of good enough to go to a school and show them your work. You actually have to have things come out of that. So for example, I mean, the first one is kind of obvious, right? Because if the material is too hard, they won't engage, and we've seen that. Students actually doing calculations, so interacting with the material. This is the key. Apparently, students talking about what they've learned, so they do some work, they say what it means. And this is the Holy Grail, which is to have students dictate future research programs. This is a tricky thing, as I'm sure you can imagine, to actually harness. So you're crowdsourcing research, which is nuanced, let's say. There's an experiment which we have ongoing at the moment, which is to do with the golden ratio, because I suspected, as did my students, that it's a bit of nonsense, really. So we decided what we would do is an experiment where you go online and you are given the free choice with your phone of drawing rectangles. And we then measure what was the ratio of those rectangles. And one of the things that we did, by the way, the average ratio is not the golden ratio. It's close to about 1.8 we've found so far. There we are. I'm sure we can concoct a number which is relevant. Anywho, what we have here, and one of the tools which we're using to get students engaged, is an entry into the analysis of the data. So on the, actually, I won't reveal the genders just yet. These points here represent screen clicks. So when students drew a rectangle, it would take all four corners, put them on here, and then create a heat map around that. So you can kind of get a sense of where have they clicked, which areas of the screen do they prefer, and you can hence instigate a conversation about what does this actually mean. One of these is boys, one of these is girls, and I wonder who thinks that the one on the left, actually let's have a vote. So the one on the left for boys, what do we reckon? And the one on the left for girls? Is this just because boys are messier than girls? Yeah.
It's more square.
It's more square. Actually, that's one thing which is found. So there is a gender difference. So we have female participants over here and male participants over here. And what we do, sorry, other way, in a mirror. Yes, sorry, female, male, there we go. This is part of a collaborative research project that we're rolling out across the entire county with the Education Business Partnership. We are looking, if anyone is interested, to do this in other counties as well once we've kind of finessed the experiment a little bit. Okay, so there are some things we need to tidy up. If anyone is interested, please speak to me after. We're essentially good to go. We can give you a link. Students can do the experiment, and then we can collect all the data and analyse it. Okay, that's essentially what I have to say. Thank you.